So exactly the same as before. If you know these two numbers, you're comparing two different potential modifications. You have these numbers. You can work out what is the reference point when they are equal. And so if the ratio of these is bigger than our equal ratio, then here we have our added is better. And if the relationship between those two modifiers is less than that, then our more is better. So let's just see, does that all tie up with what we showed at the start? Increase over more is bigger than the original additive factor. That is correct. Added over more is the base divided by the added effectiveness. Now, did I see the added effectiveness? Did I? Ah, look at that. We accidentally left out this guy. So he would have been there. I just deleted him at the wrong time. And so we would divide both sides by that. And then that goes over there. There we go. So that's how you can use some algebra magic to derive these formulas and maybe use them as a shortcut to see the individual effect of a given modifier in one of those three brackets on the total damage. So what you could do, this is just the way I've done it for a demonstration purpose. It's by all means got plenty of room for improvement. But let's illustrate what we've just gone through. Let's say we have a skill of 200 base damage. Now you can get this from Last Epoch tools, or if you're lucky, the skill tells you in the game. Let's say we have 120 added damage. Let's say the added effectiveness is at 250%. And maybe we already have 300% increased damage. Let's say for now we don't have any increases in our multiplicative side of the equation. Just for reference, not entirely needed. If you did have all that information, this would be your damage dealt by a hit with these stats. So we want to compare what is the added versus the increased as a percent. So let's say, I don't know, let's say you find yourself with another 20 damage. Now let's say we are comparing with a 20% increased damage. So we're either 20 flat or 20% increase. So here we're saying the equal value ratio, which we just spent all that time looking at the formulas for, is 50. The actual ratio that we have between these two is 100. And what that means is that the plus 20 is more valuable than the 20% increase. Okay, so let's now look at an example where we do an increased versus more percent. Actually, no, let's do an added versus more percent because I have one in mind. If we look at the swarm skill for the druid, for example, it's base damage of 10, looking at the physical aspect. On the added damage, let's say you have 100 from your weapon, and you also get 15 for every locus you consume. Let's say you had 14 of them. You have a total added damage of 310. That skill has 300% effectiveness. Let's say you already had a combination of physical and damage over time increases of, I don't know, let's say you already had 300%, so we have 3. But then the real kicker for this skill is if you have the right node, let's say you had 200 bleed stacks, which you've consumed, and you get a 50% damage increase for each of those stacks. Okay, now we have a whopping 10,000% in the increased damage bucket. Let's say in this case we do have a 20% multiplier on the complete sum there. Come out with about 117k damage. Now, let's say in the skill tree for the Swarmblade form on the Druid, you have an option to add 6 flat damage to each locust consumed. So let's say in this case we're looking at an extra 6 damage times by the 14 locusts. In this case, it's a quite reasonable increase on added damage for this particular skill. Let's say we're trading between, let's say we have another 20% more multiplicative damage available to us. Maybe it's from a skill, or I don't know, can we get that from blessings or idols, whatever. Wherever it comes from, let's just assume we have the option of another 20% more. Our equal value ratio in this case is 313, and our actual ratio is 420, which is obviously bigger than this one. So in this particular case, while we are using this skill and we've consumed some stacks and we've consumed the maximum number of locusts, then the additional damage obtained by the flat damage bonus for the skill is already more than a 20% bonus. Now this one is a little bit unfair because actually this 84 damage is coming from the skill tree itself, and I'm not aware that there is a trade anywhere where this would make sense, because in reality this would come from your gear somewhere and they would stack together and there wouldn't be a problem. But just for illustration purposes, this could be one example that you may face where there is an increase in added damage, where you already have a sizable increase percentage, where the combination of those two will outweigh the benefit of increased multiplicative damage. There are probably some other cases like this where you can get some crazy multipliers because of a little bit extra added or a little bit extra more, whatever. This was just one example that I might do a proper video on later, because the swarm skill is one of my favorites in the game. Not that I've played an awful lot myself. Anyway, that is basically an example of what you could do with all of this stuff. Whether it's useful, I don't know. Hopefully it was interesting to you to see how we can manipulate the formulas to meet the needs that we have at the time. The main thing about this is that this ratio, depending on the modifiers that you're comparing, is entirely dependent on the character stats that you have. So this may not be true for the build guide that you're following. You're trying to get to those endgame stats that Maxwell have put together or whatever. What this does is you take what you have now and you have an option of 2 different improvements. This will help you decide which one will have the bigger bonus right now. That's not to say that in 10 minutes time you won't find a better item or a better skill or better affix somewhere that then you have to check again. That's entirely possible. This is an action RPG after all. But hopefully that was useful for you, and I've just spent a lot of time talking. There's a lot of words on the screen, not so many numbers. So on that note, I'm going to go and play, and if you want to see some more content like this, where we can dig into a bit more of the details, see the sort of interactions that's going on, it's definitely possible to go into more details for specific calculations on what is contributing the most to your total damage. So an extra video could be possible on that. But anyway, thanks for sticking around if you did, and hopefully see you next time. Cheers, guys.